All righty. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us in this experience. We called it everything that or no, we called it I never learned that in Sunday school. What I wanted to do was take a look at some aspects of contemporary Jewish experience that and look at it from an adult point of view, as opposed to the way that well, I'll just talk about in my case, meaning like 60, 65 years ago in religious school, and the way I won't ask anybody else how many years ago it was, but for some it may have been more recent, and some may even older than me. But the different things that we learned, and either it was in an unquestioning kind of environment, or it was brought to our attention as this is something that you have to learn and accept, and it's not a matter of trying to understand or comprehend or even assimilate what this particular fact or story or custom or whatever, where it came from, why we do it. This is what it means to be Jewish when we were younger. Now we're more mature. I'll speak for myself. We're more mature. We're more sophisticated. I won't necessarily speak for myself, but we can look at some of the stories, some of the insights, some of the beliefs, the customs, and try to understand them from our experience and our need in the contemporary world. I made a point last week of not quoting, but paraphrasing a guiding approach for me in this kind of discussion is what I learned from my professor of Jewish philosophy at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, the late Alvin Reines, who gave me the perspective, gave to all of us the perspective that that religion, Judaism certainly, religions don't provide answers for us. They provide responses to those questions of life, those experiences of life, those doubts that we have, the sense of wonder or awe that we have that we can't really explain scientifically. And so religions come along to provide those kind of responses. That's his term. Those kind of responses when the things that we can't understand, when they do happen to us, or for us, or with us, and those responses might be in word, they might be in song, they might be in prayer, they might be in recipe, they might be in the things that we wear, they might be in the gifts that we exchange, that might be in the things that we for the Christians that we give up for Lent. Okay, so there's reasoning behind it that helps us respond to what life throws at us. And when we found a satisfying, again, that's Reines's term, when we found a satisfying set of responses to our life's conditions, then we are, quote unquote, religious. Or in a Christian term, we found salvation, we're saved. But in a Jewish sense, then we are religious. It's not a matter of practicing because God told us to do so. It's a matter of we practice or we observe because it makes sense for us and helps us respond to those concerns of life. So that's kind of an overriding thing. last week we talked about a number of different God concepts. We talked about the difference of knowing things and believing things, and suspending. And we didn't necessarily quote Kierkegaard, but of suspending our need to empirically prove different things. I gave the example of, here's gravity. That if I drop the marker, we know that it's going to fall, kind of thing. But that's empirically proven, as opposed to trying to figure out what God is, what God is not, because my experience is going to be different than your experience, based on age, based on sex, based on all kinds of things. Okay, I want to move on. And today, a little bit of a flip in what I had sent out a couple of weeks ago to people. So I'm going to call this From Womb to Tomb. All right, from womb to tomb, looking at some of the aspects of the Jewish life cycle and some of the practices that we follow, where they came from, why we do them, and some of the insights into what they might mean. But also, as I said last week, and this is kind of a rule of thumb for this discussion, I'm going to try to leave 10, 15 minutes at least at the end if there are particular questions about, well, what do you think about this, or how does this come? Because I can't cover everything, no matter how quickly I speak. So let me give you this quotation. Glasses coming back on. Let me give you this quotation from Professor Chaim Schaus, who was one of, some of you may have written. He has a couple books. One is The Lifetime of a Jew. Another one is like the Jewish holiday cycle, the Jewish festival cycle, something like that, where he looks at the different aspects of Jewish experience, both where they cut from biblical times, from medieval times, rabbinic literature, and then contemporary times. Now, contemporary for him meant like in the 1940s and 50s. So there's been a lot of change since then also. But this is how he described what I'm talking about, womb to tomb, life cycle insights. Quote, "The solemn moments which mark the milestones in Jewish life, the symbolic rites and religious ceremonies that have since ancient times been surrounded by popular customs, which lend form and color to the Jewish way of life." Okay. Now, having said that, I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a sidebar. Hopefully do it like 3,000 years of Jewish history in about 10 minutes. Let's see. Okay. And anyone familiar with the name Chaim Potok?
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Chaim Potok, and I don't mean Potok as a novelist. I mean him as a historian. Okay. Yes, he wrote the Promise, The Chosen. My name is Asher Lev. A couple others. Okay. Orthodox rabbi, very good writer, very good editor. He was the director of the Jewish Publication Society for a while. He has since passed away. But Chaim Potok also has a very readable history of the Jews. If you're looking for a history of the Jews, that I believe it goes up to around the 1970s, something like that. So, maybe 50 years ago. And if I'm not mistaken, it's called Wanderings. But Potok's theme of understanding Jewish history is that we are a people defined by culture conflict. Okay? Culture conflict. That we pretty well know who we are and who we want to be. But throughout history, there have been other peoples and other circumstances that have kind of interacted with us and imposed themselves upon us. And so we've been forced to either fight back, or we've been forced to remove ourselves, or we've been forced to compromise. We've been forced to make changes up to a certain point, obviously, up to a certain point in who we are and who we want to be. That's Potok's way of looking at Jewish history. So beginning already back with Abraham and then continuing on through. If we know that we want to be the chosen people, how out of God to choose the Jews kind of thing. What is it that we're chosen for? That's a personal person, that's something that we all personally answer. But if we want to be unique, we want to be different, we want to be special, if you're comfortable using the word, we want to be holy, right? If that's our calling, if that's our mission, doesn't mean never, and I think Potok says this, but I certainly affirm it. Nowhere does it say that we want to be the best. Okay? Never says that we want to be better than anyone else. It does say we want to be different. Okay? It does say we want to be unique in the way that we do things, in the way that we approach life. Not better than anyone else, but we want to do it in a unique way. Okay. So along come some of these other nations, empires, peoples, kings, not so much the queens, but but others who try to impose their will upon us, and we have to make a decision. So let's use just as an example for that, and then like I said, then in about 10, 12 minutes, I'm going to try to do all of Jewish history just to set it up. But go back to the Hanukkah story. Okay, go back to the Hanukkah story. Right, the Syrian Greeks take over the temple. Right, and what's the normal story that we tell the kids? And when we light the candles and whatever, what's the Nes Gadol Haya Sham? Great miracle happened there. What's the miracle? Who remembers? What's the miracle? The menorah, which is the candelabra, which is this week's Torah portion, incidentally. The menorah lasts for 8 days. Okay. What's the big miracle? They thought that they only had enough oil, because oil is not a matter of the having enough candles in the box, right? Or plug into the electricity. So it's needed, and it's not just oil, it's holy oil. Okay, from hard pressed olive oil, pure olive oil, etc. So they only thought that they had enough for one day, because the Syrian Greeks had come along, and when they desecrated the temple, they poured out all the oil, or they used it to fry up whatever they were making. They were not eating the latte, right? Whatever. Yeah. Okay. So there was only enough oil. They sent a runner to Modin, is where the Maccabees headquarters were. They sent and where the high priest was. They sent a runner. It took him. I did that. I didn't run, but we did a march. It's about 50 kilometers. Okay. So send a runner to go get the oil, and going through enemy lines and whatever. And by the time he came back, it had been 8 days. Meanwhile, the menorah had still miraculously stayed lit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If I say that's B-U-L-L-S, you can finish the word. It does not appear in the sacred literature. That story does not appear in the sacred literature. Okay. Why did they come up with 8 days? No. Because of the siege of the temple, the Jews had never been able to celebrate Sukkot. So when they came back into the temple, they said, well, okay, now let's celebrate Sukkot, which is an 8-day festival. Okay, so that's why it's 8 days. Then somebody came up with this. That's not a good enough answer. We need something a little more miraculous. We need a little, we need a little more pizzazz. Okay, so they came up with a larger story, and it's a whole miracle story, and that's what all the legend and the songs and the latkes, and the dreidels and all this, and then add another 1,800 years, and then what gets added on to Hanukkah? Why is it such an important holiday for Jewish community around the world now? Because it comes close to Christmas, okay? Where's this notion of, presents every night and, and whatever? That had nothing to do with Hanukkah. So it's a perfect example, just a second, Sean. It's a perfect example of how there was an experience. There was an actual rebellion to be able to reclaim the temple. Okay? Once they reclaimed the temple, they said, and incidentally, it wasn't necessarily a popular revolution or a popular rebellion. Just the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, but that's a whole other story too. And once they reclaimed the temple, they said, we weren't able to celebrate Sukkot. Let's take the next 8 days, and we'll have a pilgrimage festival, and we'll encourage people to come to Jerusalem, and whatever. And then another layer on top of a layer on top of a layer on top of a layer. And now, if you ask the average, let's not say adult, but if you ask the average Sunday school kid, right, our grandchildren or whatever, what's so special about Hanukkah? Oh, 8 days and a candle, and Hanukkah and whatever, and it's an entirely different thing. So that's Potok's theory of so much of our Jewish, I don't want to say baggage, because that has a connotation of negative, okay? But of all the things that we carry with us, our heritage, our legacy, everything that comes along with us is based on these different layers of understanding that were affected by whatever, and use Christmas as the perfect example. It has nothing to do, but now for the contemporary Jewish world, Hanukkah and Christmas are forever linked together. Yes, Shelley.
You say that they came up with the story. Who's they?
The rabbis, the educators, the parents, the grandparents, the ones who had to come up with some kind of an answer.
Do they know when this story started?
With the legend story?
The legend, yeah.
Not exactly do we know when it started, but it's known as of the maybe 5th century. People are aware of it, and there are references to it. Okay, but not by the scholars. It's if I use the term midrash, do people know what midrash is? Midrash is filling in the blanks. Okay, that whether it's because we didn't understand the Hebrew, whether it was because there were unanswered questions. So midrash is later literature that says, aha, maybe this is what happened. That we're going to do a bunch of that next week, talking about Bible, some stories, and how do we understand it? What does the midrash say as opposed to the actual text and whatever. Esther, Ricky.
Okay, so you're not saying that when you talk about culture conflict, Chaim Potok saying that you're referring to other cultures, not within our own, because
well, yes, there certainly is culture, there certainly is conflict within us, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Hillel, Shammai, the Reform Orthodox, whatever it might be. That's not what he's referring to. He's referring to the desire for Judaism to maintain itself in light of our conflicts, whether they're military, whether they're emotional, whether they're societal, generational, the conflicts with the others around us. That's what.
Yeah, that's, are you familiar with Max de Mont's history
Sure,
of Jews?
sure.
Because it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what I got was like how we as Jews kept reinventing ourselves to fit into whatever the culture was we were
Right,
in.
right. Yeah, and certainly since the 1860s, the word that people have avoided using because it confuses us is reform.
I said
Okay,
reinvent.
you say reinvent, others say we'll progress or we'll adapt and whatever. But since there's a reform movement, it doesn't mean reform is not doesn't mean that the reform movement is the most authentic. It means that Judaism has always been reforming.
Exactly.
Okay, going all the way back to the Torah. There, if you look at something the way it is in Genesis or Exodus, it's totally different by the way that they describe it. Or Moses describes it in Numbers and Deuteronomy. So obviously in those 40 or either 40 generations or 40 years of wandering, they made some reforms. They made some changes. So it's always been there. Okay. All right. History. Are you ready? Okay. So Abraham and Sarai, or Avram and Sarai, they become Abraham and Sarah. They are known as, begins with an H. They are known as H-E.
Hebrews?
Yeah, okay. They're known as Hebrews. All right. Hebrews, probably the best translation would be nomads. Okay, all right. An Ivri is someone, okay, from my Hebrew language students who were here before, right? Okay, so three root letters. An ayin and a vet and a resh, okay, so that's something that's to cross over. That's to move from one place to another. Okay, all right. So that's how Abraham is referred to as a Hebrew, and then the whole clan that follows after him, and they continue to be known that way even all the way until Jonah, when Jonah is asked, who are you? What people are you from? He says, I am a Hebrew. So obviously even that many centuries later, people still knew of them as the Hebrews. Okay. So Abraham and Sarah, God says, Lech lecha, go to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They crossed, that's where we call them the Hebrews. They crossed the Tigris and the Euphrates. They go into what's the promised land, or Canaan, or Canaan in Hebrew. And then there's all the stories of Isaac and Rebecca, and then Jacob and Leah, Rachel, and Zilpah, and the whole thing. And then they go to Egypt. I told you we're going to do this fast, right? You go to Egypt, all right, and a new Pharaoh arises who did not know Joseph, and 437 years of slavery. And then along comes Moses, right, and leads the people out. The 10 plagues, we're going to celebrate all that on which holiday? Pesach, which is just a little more than a month. It's like a month and right, reservation for the Seder. Right. Okay, month and like 4 days or something like that. All right. Cross the Sea of Reeds, not Red Sea, but the Sea of Reeds. Get to Mount Sinai, accept the at least the 10 commandments, if not the whole Torah, depending on which way you want to say it. Moses comes down from the top of the mountain, and what does he see? People have done what? Built a golden calf to worship as if they still are thinking of Egypt. All right. Moses, depending on which way you want to say it, either he smashes the 2 tablets, or he drops the 2 tablets. Either he's angry or he's astonished, or whatever it is, goes back. The people are going to be punished. That's a different part of the story, but Moses goes back up to the top of the mountain and says to God, we got a problem. Okay. The problem is that the people don't know you. They don't understand you. They've seen all these wonders. They've seen these plagues. They've seen ototu mofkim in Hebrew. They've seen your wondrous things, your outstretched right arm. Remember we were talking last week about Schwarzenegger's, right? Schwarzenegger's outstretched right arm, right? That's strong. But they don't know who you are. You want us to follow you. You want us to believe in you. Help me explain to them who you are. And it changes the dynamic of what's called the Brit. You know, the word Brit, we'll come back to it. The Brit, the covenant, in that sense. Okay. We'll come back to bris. We'll come back to that. That's life cycle piece. All right. So it changes the dynamic of the Brit. God now says, okay, I'm willing to be a little more understanding, explains to Moses how Moses should explain to the people who this God is, because after all, their only experience is the stories that they've heard of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the God who did all these crazy things to the Egyptians, right? You know, turned the Nile into blood and all of those things. So now we have a little bit of a different understanding. In other words, as Potok would do, okay? In other words, the people are growing up a little bit. So up until the Egyptian experience, they were very elementary in their religious understanding. As most people, most clans, most tribes, most peoples were in those days. You had an idol, you worshiped, okay? What happened? Okay, the sun's going down at the end of this period. Did you have any confidence that it was going to rise the next morning? No. No. What does that mean? And the moon having different shapes and size, and what does any of that mean? We don't really know. So we'll come up with some kind of worship prayer. God, don't go away. God, we need rain. God, we need this. Whatever it might be. But now, God or Eloha or Elohim or whatever, or Yahweh or whatever word you want to use, we get a little more sophisticated because in relation to or in opposition to the experience that the Israelites, the Hebrews had in all of their wandering, and then in being in Egypt. So now they have to prove themselves. They have to learn how to start a society. They do that in the 40 years of wandering. Moses dies. Joshua takes over, leads the people across the Jordan stream. It's not the Jordan River. It's about as wide as this. It's not the mighty Mississippi. It's the Jordan stream. They conquer the promised land. And try to set up some kind of a nation with all the different tribes claiming different territory. Okay, that based on their own desires, these people want to live closer to the sea. These people want to live in the desert. These people want to live in the in the mountains. They like the ski slopes. Whatever it is. Okay, but these people are the fishermen and fisherwomen, so they want to live closer to the sea. The warriors have to live in areas where they can protect the highlands and the lowlands and the valleys and the main caravan travel routes, and it's all assigned, and they think they're gonna live hunky dory, and they try different types of societal government. They try having a military leader, that's Joshua. They try having leaders called the judges, including women, right? That doesn't do them very well. They try having the religious leaders only. The people say, no, we want to be, again, culture conflict. We want to be like everybody else. They have a king, right? Why should we be different? Well, Judaism, again, was saying, yes, you are different. we want you to be different. We want you to have a different type of approach to life, to government, to connecting one to the other. No, we really want to be like everyone else, and we want to have a king. Okay, God finally allows Samuel to appoint a king. That's King Saul, who's the first king. That doesn't work out very well. The next one is King David, who's an empire builder and solidifies things and conquers Jerusalem, which was known as Jebus before that, the Jebusites. But David isn't the ideal character, and there's a lot of how are we going to understand King David, and that's for a different kind of conversation. So David dies. There's debate as to who's going to take over, but it becomes his son Solomon. Solomon completes building the temple in Jerusalem, and right around the year 1000 BCE, easy year to remember and to put onto the timeline. Right around the year 1000 BCE, the temple is dedicated, consecrated in Jerusalem. They bring the Ark of the Covenant that has not only the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments, but also the fragments, the shattered thing. They're all brought up into this magnificent temple in Jerusalem. And again, and everybody says, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. Where we see that expression. And for those who grew up in the Catholic Church or went to Catholic college like I did, it's Sanctus, 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 Dei Sabaoth. Okay, all right. And I can do part of the Latin Mass if I have to, but that's and again, and they hope that things are going to be hunky-dory. They can establish a cult, let's call it with a small c. They can establish a cult that's based on bringing sacrifices and worship in the temple and a hierarchy of the high priest and the Levites and they develop their religious society that way because the kings haven't proven to be the best, most ethical and moral leaders. When Solomon dies, there's kind of fighting between his sons as to who's going to take over, and the country splits north and south. The northern kingdom is known as Israel, 10 of the tribes. The southern kingdom is known as Judah, because Judah and Benjamin. Benjamin is the smallest. Benjamin is the youngest. Benjamin is the one that King David he comes from that tribe. Because they were located in the area of Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Bethlehem is basically a suburb of Jerusalem, if you've never been there. It's like about as far as we are here from Quail Creek. I mean, even with the cut-through road, okay? It's about that distance. So Jeroboam and Rehoboam, Solomon's sons, fight amongst themselves. Who's going to be the leader? You have the northern kingdom, Israel, 10 tribes. You have the southern kingdom of Judah, which is the largest tribe. It has the most populace as well as the largest territory. That's where we get the name Judaism from, because of Judah. The northern kingdom is attacked by Assyria in 722 BCE and destroyed, and that's why we talk of the 10 lost tribes, because we lose all track of what happens to the 10 tribes that were in the north in Israel. We just have no, and maybe they became the Eskimos, maybe they went to Ethiopia, wherever. We just don't know. The southern kingdom of Judah. And this is the time of some of the prophets who warned against the assimilating and intermarriage, et cetera, and warned against. This is a conversation that we had in the Torah study class the other day, and warned against too much focus on sacrifices and not enough focus on ethical behavior. But in 586, the southern kingdom and Jerusalem are destroyed by the Babylonians. And rather than all the people being dispersed, the Babylonians take the Judeans, the Judahites, if you will, the Judeans to Babylon. Okay, you might remember, if not from the Bible, you might remember from the Don McLean song, "By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered these, O Zion." Okay, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its cunning, may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I do not place thee over my chiefest joy. So they're exiled to Babylon. That's what we call the Babylonian exile, the first exile. But then Babylon itself is conquered by the Persians. Okay, King Xerxes. Good. If you allow proper names in your Scrabble game, okay. Xerxes is a great. Get you a lot of points in Xerxes with Xerxes, right? All right. Okay. So Xerxes basically says, and he's probably connected to Ahasuerus from the Purim story that we'll do on Monday, but I'm not sure exactly where in the dynasty. But Xerxes, or later on King Cyrus and Darius, depending on where you, like I say, where you are in the dynasty, basically say to the Jews, look, you are welcome to stay here and become good Persian citizens. Okay, you can practice your religion however you want, but pay taxes, but you'll be Persians, right? The religion that Persia develops into Zoroastrianism. Okay. Or if you wish, those who wish to return to Jerusalem under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah can go back to Jerusalem. The king is saying, I'll even loan you the money to rebuild your temple. You're going to be part of the Persian Empire, but you can be back in Jerusalem and rebuild your temple. So some stay, a very strong community stays, and we know that for two reasons. One is the story we're going to share on Purim, okay? And the other is because of the Babylonian Talmud, where all the academies of Jewish law are based, okay? All right. So there's a strong community that stays in Babylon, in Persia, formerly Babylon, okay? And then others go back to Jerusalem and reestablish the sacrificial cult there as of, around 400, 430 BCE, whatever. After the Persians are then attacked and conquered by the Greeks. The Greeks, okay? Yeah, the Syrians, in some places they're allied, right? But Alexander the Great, okay, all right, right, the Greeks, and that's for about another 300 years or so, and that's the time period of the Hanukkah story that we were talking about before. And 135 is a Bar Kokhba revolt against the Syrian Greeks, and and whatever. Then the Greeks are. This is taking longer than 10 minutes. So. then the Greeks are conquered by the Romans. Right, not my ancestors, but by the Romans. Okay, and we have any number of conflicts there, not only between the Jews and the Romans, but within the Jewish community. That's what was asking about before. The Sadducees and the Pharisees and the Essenes, and the new Christians, or call them new Christians, if you will, those who were following Jesus originally were all Jews. They're all Jews, and till the day that they died, they all considered themselves still Jews. But that eventually Rome decides enough, and in the year 70 AD, 70 CE of the Common Era, the temple is destroyed. Then some of the some of the Jews flee and fight back. We call them the Zealots. That's the name of that's the original, the Hasidim original, not the kind of not that kind of Hasidim, but the Hasidim are the Zealots that fought back. Others, and there are great stories about how they fled in secret out of Jerusalem, and they go to a place called Yavne, which is closer to the Mediterranean coast, southeast of Tel Aviv, present Tel Aviv. And they founded new academies there because the issue was, well, now if you don't have the temple in Jerusalem, and you don't have the high priests, and you don't have the Levites anymore because they've all been destroyed, how do you worship? How, and if you don't have the temple, how do we pray to God and whatever? Not do we pray to God? Not why do we pray to God? That was all still a given. Okay, we're not going to forsake God. They saw the destruction of the temple and the victories of the Romans. They saw as justified because the Jews were fighting amongst themselves. It's called sinat chinam, is baseless hatred amongst themselves, and that this was God punishing the Jews. That was the main theme, if you will. But in Yavna, they decided to do two things. One is to start the notion of an academy. You know the word yeshiva, okay? To start an academy to study, but also they took the Greek word of synagogue, okay, and said, okay, we can have local community places of worship, gathering, education, assembly. But what they didn't know was what prayer would look like, what worship would look like. And it took a couple centuries of discussion, debate, to come up with what we have now, which is based on a prayer book, a set order of prayers, and again, to use the Rhinus's word from when I began, of responses. Okay, so here are words of, there are basically 4 different kinds of, call them prayers. Okay, there's praise. God, you are great. You created the world, right? Okay, and it's a beautiful world. Praise. Second, thanksgiving. Thank you, God, for creating such a beautiful world and giving us the opportunity to live there. Right? Then third is petition, okay? Or please, God, make sure that we have the strength and the wisdom to take care of your world. Okay, this beautiful world that you have encouraged us to live here. And then the fourth is forgiveness. We're sorry, God, that we have not been taking care of your world that you put us in charge of, kind of thing. So basically, they get all of the prayers, and they've been in the same order, basically the way we have them on Friday night, Saturday morning, weekday mornings, whatever it might be. They've been basically in the same order since around the 8th century. Okay. All in the same wording. Translations are going to change. A few words here and there are going to change. The melodies obviously change. They didn't sing Adon Olam to Hamilton. What kind of like we do. But that's how they continue. Okay. You get to the period then of the Talmud, of trying to put all of these legal things together. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week, of how you put all these legal things together, as well as okay, for understanding and for guidance. Middle Ages, we go from this is what you must do into a little more, what should we call it? Daily practice. Okay. What in legal terms, or Jewish legal terms, they call them the codes. Okay. But of Jewish practice and questions and answers, a response to literature. I think I did a class about that a couple of years ago, and we'll do it again, I'm sure. How do we do this? Like the best example is keeping your head covered. But there are lots of other examples and literature too. And then, of course, again, you get back into the culture conflict of those who say, oh, well, okay, these Jews are money hungry, or these Jews won't accept Jesus, or whatever the case may be. And anti-Semitism rears its angry head. We'll talk about that at the end of the month. And anti-Semitism raises it, then whether it's in the blood libels, in the Middle Ages, whether it's in the pogroms, whether it culminates in the Holocaust, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there are other themes that continue on through it too. But when I'm going to give some examples of some of these life cycle ceremonies and customs, we have to put them in the context of the history. That's why I spent all this time on it, because they don't come out of nowhere. And it's not just that God said, you must do this, or that the quote unquote, the tradition says, you must do this. It's why was it said, you must do this, or you shouldn't do that? Judaism has always said, we need to kind of understand what the motivation might have been and what the reasoning was behind it. Not so that we determine, are we going to do it or follow it or not follow it? That traditionally wasn't the option. Okay, that wasn't the option. The option was, how do we find meaning in doing it, or choosing not to do it? And what did that mean for our lives? So I guess the best illustration to use would be the following. I'm going a little bit out of the order that I wanted to follow, but circumcision. Okay, I'm not asking for a volunteer for.
We don't have anybody here that qualifies except you.
We don't know that, right?
And I won't show you either.
So all right, so we'll jump to that as the illustration. The reality is, okay, and let's do terms first. Okay, bris is not circumcision. Okay. Bris is the Hebrew word brit for covenant. Circumcision in Hebrew is milah. So again, going back for the Hebrew students, a three-letter root, so you can get the connection to the ritual circumcisor is called a
Moil.
Well, moil is in Jewish, it's mohel.
Oh,
It's mohel in Hebrew. So you get the same letters of the three letters shorish. Okay. Now, don't get confused if you do know some Hebrew vocabulary. The word milah actually means word also. Okay, W-O-R-D. No connection. No, there are words and phrases that can have two meanings, two totally unrelated meanings, right? Okay. So milah, that means word, comes from one etymological base. Milah, meaning the act of circumcision, comes from the etymological base that means to cut. Okay, all right. We do not know. We just do not know where, when, or why circumcision was chosen or was assigned as this, sorry for the redundancy of words, as the sign, as ot habrit, the sign of the covenant. We just don't know. Yeah, but God doesn't say, do this because. God says, do this, okay? Circumcise Ishmael. Ishmael is the first, okay? Circumcise Ishmael, circumcise yourself, then Isaac will be circumcised later, okay? But not why? Only as a sign of the covenant. Right? Other peoples at the time practiced it, but not universally. Okay, the Jews are not the only ones, or the Israelites or the Hebrews are not the only ones. Okay, but throughout Jewish history, for one reason or another, and we can only speculate, and I can't even share with you what those reasons really might be. Okay, other than carving a J or whatever, you know, in your forehead, I don't know. But why was circumcision not only chosen as the sign of the covenant, as the sign, put it capital T, the capital S, the sign of the covenant, but it takes such high precedence in Jewish practice. And it's a good example. I won't say it's the perfect example, but it's a good example for what we're talking about, again, back to Potok's culture conflict stuff. Okay, all right. Yeah.
But Arabs, I mean, I was in Morocco and I stumbled onto a circumcision, but they were like young teenage boys. They were pubescent
Yes.
boys.
Yeah.
Much later.
Yeah,
So
right. Well, yeah. In other cultures, it's definitely in Africa too.
Yeah.
It's definitely a sign of puberty.
Right, exactly.
Okay, it's a sign of puberty, and frequently what they do is the circumcision is performed, and then they go off onto the mountains and have to survive on their own. They have to heal and survive on their own. It's a test of fortitude, manhood, if you will. It's an act that was a ceremony of puberty. But so here are two examples, or not examples, but here are two things that shine through with this notion of the culture conflict. One is internal. Okay? The act of circumcision and participating in the brit, in the covenant, is not the most important thing. Okay? What's most important throughout the legal literature is that it happened on the 8th day.
I was gonna ask, why the 8th day?
Okay. I can't answer why the 8th day. Again, that's another one of the someone said there's got to be some kind of a reason somewhere. I don't know if it's a medical reason or if it's just, well, that's, you know, again, we were talking about with the in the temple that, you know, that the harvest, you know, was an 8-day kind of festival. So it may have just, but it's easy to, you know, if it happened, if the baby's born on, the boy's born on a Sunday, then we're going to do the bris on the Sunday, you know, something like that. I don't know, but having the bris or the bris performed on the 8th day is, if you might not know this, is more important than almost every other mitzvah, every other commandment of the 613 commandments in Jewish practice. Okay, you having the bris on the 8th day supersedes Yom Kippur. Okay,
Does it supersede
not only
Shabbat?
not only a typical Shabbat, but any other holiday, holy day, when we are told not to work. Now, it doesn't mean that you eat. Okay, doesn't mean that you have the party, but the act of circumcision not only must take place on the 8th day, unless what?
Baby.
Health, right. Health of the baby. Some are now saying health of the mother, but definitely health of the baby. Okay. Otherwise, it must. I'm sorry.
Cesarean birth? No, they still have it on that.
Still, it's the point is to have it on. The point is to have it on the 8th day. So, okay. So if you're the moil, if you're the ritual circumciser, and it's Yom Kippur, even if it's Shabbat, but if it's Yom Kippur, all right, you leave the synagogue and you walk, obviously you walk, right? You walk to the house where the bris is going to take place. You perform the bris. Okay, again, no eating. The baby can have a little bit of wine. The baby, but Borei Pri Hagafen is not recited. Okay. And then he walks back or waits till after sunset, and then can get your ride back if you want. After sunset. Okay. What does he do about his tools? He has to drop them off before him. Right. You can't carry. Okay. So all of the other rules of Yom Kippur or Shabbat still hold, except for that one thing, that it must take place on the 8th day. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to ask you, Esther.
For those who don't know, Esther's a nurse.
Yes.
Professor of nursing. Okay.
I was told at one time that the vitamin K was either highest or lowest, I can't remember, on that 8th day.
Oh, that's interesting. I know they give the baby vitamin K as an injection. I'm not a
But in the old days, they couldn't have done that.
Right.
They also wouldn't have known what vitamin K is.
So, God
It would have been vitamin C. Vitamin C.
I don't mean to say couple, but it's sort of like I remember my old rabbi saying, everybody would ask, why did they go up and, bow before they went up to the bima? And there used to be a lamp.
Yeah,
That's why.
right.
Okay.
Sure.
But so they could have seen through trial and error that maybe on the 8th day, babies did better.
Good point. Good point.
Okay, so that's kind of leading in. Thanks. That's kind of leading into what I had to say. For the moment, drop the religious aspect of it and realize that when these laws or when these guidelines were being written, okay, what was the infant mortality rate? Right. Okay. So you had a little more confidence by after a week, right, that this was a baby that was going to survive. There's no guarantees, And as a matter of fact, this is for a different conversation. As a matter of fact, technically in Jewish law, if the baby dies before the age of 30 days, technically there's not necessarily a funeral, and it's not necessarily considered a viable soul, and whatever, there's debate and whatever. But anyway, again, we don't have all the answers, but when they focused on the 8th day, who asked me who's the they, right? When they focused on the 8th day, it was at a time of recognizing that probably many, if not most, babies didn't survive till the 8th day. Okay. And then once they realized that this was really a viable boy, then you could really add the religious dimension and the celebration on top of it. Maybe. And that's all that we have with a lot of these things is a maybe, but in the context of where we were. Now, before Sue and Jeanette, but before we do, so that's the internal conflict, okay? Is it, why do we have to wait for the 8th day and and questions about, well, what if the baby's not healthy enough to, and all of that? What's the external? The external conflict is, if this is the real sign, and it, as we were joking, it's a very, very visible sign. Okay. If this is a very visible sign, what do you do when the Greeks, who believe in the beauty of the human, they didn't know me, but in the beauty of the human body, right? That you're not allowed to make any cuts. You're not allowed to make any changes in the human body, in the human form. It's beautiful. And so, the Olympics and all those kinds of things, or everything was in the nude, right? Okay. But at the same time, so they're saying, absolutely not. If you're under our rule, the Greeks are saying, under our rule, no, you can't circumcise. You can't cut the foreskin of the penis. You just cannot do that. Punishable by death. So what do? It's not like you can hide it, right? So the parent, not the boys, the 8 days, they can't really complain, but the parents or the grandparents or the whatever have to make some kind of a decision. What do? Do we participate in this mitzvah, in this commandment, which our history has said is one of the most important commandments and most important signs that we show God of our belief, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Or do we listen to the power, the Greeks who are telling us, no, you can't do, and then they have to, what Judaism says, and so Potok is in the culture conflict stuff, what they do is they say, okay, what are those guiding principles that we fall back on? Not that you have to fall back on, but you can fall back on and still consider yourself making a decision within the Jewish framework. And in this case, the answer is clear. It's God says, quoted in the Bible, in the Tanakh, God said, Eila mitzvotai, these are my mitzvot, v'chai bahem, live by them. And they underline the word live. Okay? And you kind of add in parentheses, try to live by them. Okay? In other words, it's more important that even if you're not allowed to circumcise, find some of the other mitzvot that'll be more meaningful for you. It's okay. More important that you live. Now, is that 100% universally? Was that the answer of all the rabbis? No, because we have plenty of the rabbis and plenty of the scholars and the sages and others who chose martyrdom, who chose to beat the death penalty, whatever, rather than. But what I would suggest, and I'm basing this again, like not only on my own study and experience, but on Potok's interpretation, is that in the moments of this culture conflict of Judaism, Jewish tradition has given us a choice, and saying that the choices are authentic. And so, connected to Rhinus, you find those choices and decisions which resonate best with you. And so Jewish tradition in this question of, do I circumcise or not circumcise? Or I used to have this argument with my mother-in-law with a blessed memory. You know, is it okay to eat and take your medicine on Yom Kippur? Okay, because she refused, absolutely refused. She would not. She would not. I said, Mom, come on, you've got to. I'm the rabbi. I'm telling you, it's okay. She says, no, you're supposed to fast on Yom Kippur. I'm not going to take my medicine. Which one of us is right?
You.
Well, for you, for me, I'm right, but she was right for her.
No, I know.
That, you know, that was her. Okay, I don't know which came first, Jeanette or Sue, but don't worry. I always worry about it. So, all right, Sue.
I'm an unabashed Jewish chauvinist. So I would like to think that Uncle Frank, way back in ancient times, saw a health reason to perform the circumcision. But that notwithstanding, I think there's no question that there's a tribal quality to the decision. But in more advanced times, when a Jew took an oath and swore an oath to another man, didn't he embrace his thigh?
Yeah.
And wasn't the reason because it's close to the circumcision?
Yeah, possibly close to the circumcision, possibly to test whether or not the other man was truly circumcised.
I'm not sure if it's a poll on
The question of it is because, oh, hello, everybody. Hello. the mic's over here. I don't know. We don't know if you heard Sue's question, but in the Bible, yes, one of the several times is that when someone is swearing an oath, that place, this is not heterosexual. It's only men to men. Place a hand on the inner thigh of the other when you're swearing the oath. And did that have something to do with, was it actually touching the genitalia or just in the thigh? We don't know. And like I said, I know that there's one theory was making sure, you know, that again, if this is the sign of the covenant, this is really like, what do they do? Like prick your finger, like we're blood brothers kind of thing, you know? Yeah.
Well, also, the
Go
word
ahead.
testament comes from the word testament.
Yes, testament.
So make a testament.
Right. The English word. The Hebrew has nothing to do with it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Hebrew has that's an English thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The Hebrew word is a dut for testimony, which comes from witnessing.
Right.
Okay. So it's like more of a firsthand experience, if you will. One more comment that I will make, then Shelley, Esther.
Jean.
Jeanette.
No,
Jeanette said, did you want to?
I adopted a baby who was circumcised at 3 days by his mother in the hospital. And then we adopted the baby. And in our synagogue, there was another boy with a very similar story. The boys reached bar mitzvah age, and they were made to have a little boy that was circumcised, that they had to go.
Drop of blood.
A drop, yeah.
I would assume so. If they had to have, even though they were circumcised in the hospital in a non-religious way, okay. And I want to make sure that I come back to something about that. In a non-religious way, then when it came time for bar mitzvah, they had to have a token, right. It is a long way from 18. I'm going to come back to that. Who else? Oh, Esther. Esther, do you have something else?
Up until recently, the last 20 years, it was always in the medical community, health community, that circumcision was much better and healthier. In recent years, though, there's
Yes.
been a whole movement to,
Yes.
to not circumcise. I
Yes.
just, think it's interesting, and I don't know if that's a culture conflict on another.
It is being played out. I had a student. It's probably about 2-3 years before I left Detroit. So about 10 years ago now. I had it was a former student of mine who was getting married. And, in premarital, I don't want to call it counseling, but in premarital discussions, they were talking about raising future children, Jewish and whatever. And he said, what's his first name? Getting his first name. He says, Rabbi, I want you to know something. I said, what's that? He said, if we have a boy, I'm not going to have him circumcised. And yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Both husband and groom and bride. And I'm going to send you all this literature, about how it's brutal and and it's not, and all the health, it's your choice, okay, that doesn't mean that I won't do the wedding. If that's what you're trying to challenge me on, doesn't mean I won't do the wedding, and God willing, you have a son, we'll talk about it then, but whatever. So 2 things. One that I wanted to say from notes, one is off of what Jeanette was saying. The celebration, the feast, traditionally, and this is going probably until quote unquote modern times. So let's say the 18th century. Okay. The feast was not at the bris. The feast was at the weaning.
Oh,
cool.
Okay. The feast was at the weaning when the child stopped nursing. Okay. That you didn't have that,
that really separates the son and the mother.
Right. Yeah, exactly. What did I want to do? Oh, okay. So here's another one that was unimaginable, not totally unimaginable, but mostly unimaginable, if I can say that correctly, in the Jewish community until after, let's say until about 2,000 years ago. And that is, what if there's no moil around? Okay. What if there is no Jewish trained personnel, and there are those who say, okay, well, the father goes ahead and does it. Gulp. All right. Speaking as father. All right. So, okay. But what if there is a non-Jewish pediatrician, surgeon, whatever, someone who does have medical training? What do you do? Which do you do? That's the question. Is it more important of who does the bris? Who does the circumcision? Not the bris. Who does the circumcision? More important, who does it? That person be Jewish, or that it be done well, and on the 8th day, right? And then someone who's Jewish who can say the blessings.
That's why can't they both be there, the surgeon and the father?
Right.
Together.
Right.
Do it.
Right. That's the
answer.
That's the thing. Okay. But again, prior to 2,000 years ago, who would have thought? Right. Well, of course, there's going to be somebody in our community, who will be trained, who will know how to do. We'll make sure that there's somebody who knows how to do it.
Get the butcher.
Get that butcher.
Well, he knows.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay.
or religious, where they would suck the oil, suck the blood. I mean, where did that come from? I mean, there was a recent, couple of years ago, there was a case where a student in my office.
Right.
The that's a baby. I didn't know where, and then New York State sort of tried to ban that.
Right. I don't know, frankly, where it came from, and if it's actually part of the traditional literature, or if that was just, that could.
It could be a common sense.
Some of the things that we say that we have in our prayer book, for example, are there because. And I'm not suggesting this to this congregation by any means, because the people loved their rabbi so much, right, that they said in our prayer books, in the editions that we print for our prayer books, we're going to include this particular prayer, this particular phrase that our rabbi always says. Okay, so maybe there was some moil. Whoever, that was his practice, and then everyone who he trained followed after him. I'm not aware of anything in the literature that says this is the way it's supposed to happen. So my guess is that it was just something like that. Okay. As long as we're on birth things, incidentally, there's no ceremony for a girl, right? Okay. Are you out of the picture? No, the big, nowadays there are, naming ceremonies, and there's a contemporary ceremony called a bat brit, daughter of the covenant kind of thing. There's obviously no ritual, there's no procedure, medical procedure in a physical procedure, but there are blessings that are recited these days. Again, you never in the historical literature, you'd never have a woman as the moil, right? Okay. Now, even in some Orthodox communities, it's accepted. Okay, not all, but in some. Again, that's how things change because of what's changing in our society. Pidyon Haben, okay, which is on the 30th. Oh, so I was saying that for a girl, the key is not 8 days; it's 30 days. Okay, that which is the same time frame, like I said before, for what's called a viable soul. All right. So at 30 days, and if they were going to have a naming ceremony or something, it would take place after 30 days. 30 days also then for a firstborn son, or the son who opens the womb. All right. Again, to the Torah study people, right, has to be redeemed. That's Pidyon Haben, because in biblical times, that firstborn son, like the firstborn of any species, was dedicated to God. Right. Now, for an animal, that might mean being sacrificed. Not for humans. It meant that the male child had a first male child, or first child who was a male, was devoted to synagogue or to sacrificial service, not to be a sacrifice, but to go, to be an assistant, or to do everything that Ruth Ann does, around, help out around the synagogue, and whatever. So, okay, they got to be redeemed first. They got to talk to Sid. That's Sid's job.
He did do it.
He do it right. I was redeemed also, yeah. Five silver coins. Right. Five silver coins. Right. But again, put it back in context of thousands of years ago. It was to make sure that if the priests and the Levites, if they didn't have enough, apprentices or young men to help with doing what needed to be helped, manual labor kind of thing. They were getting the money to pay someone to do it. Pardon me?
Nazarenes that were being redeemed?
No, that's something totally different.
That group that the boy would be part of if he were not redeemed. I thought
I
there was
forget.
something.
I forget.
there was
It's
a
not
specific-
Nazarene.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's
specifically,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, that has not, those are the Nazarenes, but that has nothing to do with it. Yeah, right.
Sid did not have to be redeemed because he was a Kohen.
Because he already was, right.
But
Right.
nephew, who was not the son of a Kohen, needed to be redeemed, and Sid did the ceremony.
Right. Okay.
Was it just the Cohen or
What?
was the-
No, Cohen or Levi.
Okay.
Levi, right.
So I was, that was,
Well, look, but that doesn't follow the mother.
I know, but.
Right. Okay, so which gets into probably the last thing that we'll be getting to is in the Bible, and then continuing all the way through for several hundreds, if not 1,000 years. How did you determine if someone was considered a Hebrew or Judean or an Israelite or Jew, child of? No.
No,
Because when you think about it, how many non-Jewish or Israelite or Hebrew or whatever mothers are involved in the earliest stories in the Torah? Okay. All right. Okay. So it really was the father. Okay. It was, if your father is an Israelite, then you're a member. Then you're a member. No. I said, you're not that old. Okay. All right. That's thousands of years ago in the biblical times. Okay. Also, there's no ceremony officially of conversion. All right. So some of them said, well, okay, just by virtue of the quote unquote marriage, let's say, of Jacob to Rachel's handmaidens, okay, or of Abraham to Hagar, okay, right? Just by virtue of being quote unquote marriage, because all you needed was a sexual relationship to be married in those days. So but a marriage that actually served also as a conversion. All right. Later on, then it's with Naomi and with Ruth. Ruth says, "Your people shall be my people." Your God shall be my God. So that's a little more ritualistic, but it's certainly not appearing before a Beit Din, a board of rabbis. It's certainly not going to the mikvah. It's not doing any of those, promising to keep kosher or any of those kind of things. So, but in the Torah, certainly, you're Jewish if the father was Jewish. Okay. Then it changes. Oh, there's another change. It changes to if the mother is Jewish. Why?
because you know who the mother is.
Exactly. Because you always know who the mother is. You may not know who the father is. And, again, when we first studied it, and I'm going back to the context that I was setting up, when we first studied it, that was the acceptable thing, just to be able to say, well, the Cossacks would come and they would rape Jewish girls and whatever, and why should we blame the offspring? Okay, that's not fair. The community should be welcoming and bringing in as many as we can, even the child of a rape or they don't use the word illegitimate, of a prohibited relationship, let's say. So you always know who the mother is, Therefore, if the mother was Jewish, with no big questions about how we know she's Jewish. Did she convert? Okay. Did she just, was she married to someone who was Jewish? It wasn't an issue. If she was part of the community, then she's Jewish. Okay. And that was that. And the child would be Jewish. And Talmudic literature, this statement I can make, this is another one of those, like I said, foundational statements, like the earlier one before, these are my commandments, live by them. Okay. Another foundational statement that runs through all of these issues is the benefit of the child. The benefit of the child. If there's a question, historically, you vote in favor of welcoming the child, making the child feel comfortable. And if there's somebody, this is not a value statement to anybody in this room, there's someone who is not actively involved in the community, but says that they're Jewish, we accept them as being Jewish. That's tradition, not the way that it's handled today. Someone walks in the door, forget the security concerns. Someone who walks in the door of the synagogue or the yeshiva or the school, whatever, and says, I'm Jewish, I can count me in as part of your community. We are to historically, traditionally, in the Talmud, in the Shulchan Aruch, whatever, we are to accept them. No document, you don't need a documentation, you don't need a certificate, you don't need to check their circumcision. Okay, that's the tradition. We welcome the stranger, right? But also in these cases, we're talking about the children. You make your decisions favoring the child. Okay, so for thousands of years, you were Jewish if the mother was Jewish, irrespective of who the father was, because you always knew. Right? Yeah, you had the occasional adoption. You had some things like this that people would go to the rabbi and say, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And my reading of it is that the rabbi would, as much as possible, make a decision based in favor of the child, that the child would be welcome. They might have to say, okay, we need to do a token ceremony, okay, just so that later on in life, there's no issue, issue's the wrong word, that there's no question, there's no possible, not only from the standpoint of if that person has children, but from the standpoint of what can they be buried in consecrated ground? Can they be buried in the cemetery? Okay, so someone has to make a decision, of things like that. We come up into the 20th century, and even the second half of the 20th century, after the Holocaust. But the Holocaust isn't the only issue that affects this. The other issue is the rise of intermarriage. And what happens if the father is the one who's an active Jewish participant, and the mother is perfectly acceptable to the children having a Jewish lifestyle and whatever. So the Reform movement takes the lead and says the following. It's been misunderstood. This is since I think 73 is the year that officially the statement was made. And it was publicized as that either mother or father, if either mother or father was Jewish, then the child is Jewish. That's not the resolution. I was there for the debate. I couldn't vote because I wasn't ordained yet, but I was there for the debate. The resolution was that as long as either mother or father and the child participated in Jewish religious education and participated in at least one education-oriented life cycle ceremony, meaning bar mitzvah or confirmation or something like that. So in other words, here's traditional Judaism. I don't want to say Orthodox, but here's traditional Judaism that says, well, you're automatically Jewish if your mother's Jewish. Mom may never have gone into a synagogue in her life. Child is not being taken to religious school, not being taken to the synagogue, whatever, okay? But still considered Jewish according to Jewish law. Reform, liberal, the Reconstructionists come along, and the conservative now are coming along too on that also, and saying, no, it's not just a matter of who the parent is. It's a matter of actually having active participation and education and a confirmation and a ritual that demonstrates a public identification with the community. That's what defines Judaism. So we've come a long way from just, Abraham saying to his son, okay, lay still, I'm going to cut. And you're a member of the MOT. You're a member of the tribe. To now where much, not all, not even most, but where much of the Jewish community of the 21st century is saying, no, there has to be some active participation, education, identification. It's more than just the cutting. It's more than just a parent saying, well, because I am, you are. Okay. So that one's yet to play out totally. I don't know if it'll be in our lifetimes, but that's obviously what's happening. So one last statement, then Esther, then your question. One, and then any questions. One last statement, and some of you have heard me say this before. The rabbis are not the ones who determine how Jewish identity or Jewish practice or Jewish customs or traditions or whatever play out. You do, okay? The people do. In response to, back to the old Reines definition, in response to what's going on in your lives, in society, in questions of Jewish identity, sexual identity, whatever it might be. Okay. 1975, I was ordained as a rabbi. Did I ever think that I was going to be asked to officiate as a wedding, at a same-sex marriage ceremony? I mean, it wasn't part of our thinking, mindset, consciousness in the 1970s. It was happening, but it wasn't as public, obviously. And there's an article, if anybody really wants to read it, there's an article in the latest edition of the Reform Rabbis Journal talking of what do we do when a couple comes to us asking for a marriage ceremony and they're polyamorous. And they're okay. And what that means is that they not just are open to, but they intend to pursue a marriage in which both partners, both husband, wife, or husband, wife, however, spouse, will comfortably and in agreement with each other pursue other sexual relations outside of the marriage, but they want to have some kind of a ceremony that ritualizes that. Now, I'm not saying yay or nay. I'm just saying, how did I phrase it before? Who would have thunk? Right. Who would have thunk? But that is now a reality and part of the world in which we are all living. Esther, you know.
I don't know if it was in the States, New York, or England, where there was this whole big thing where this couple who would raise the kid Jewish, but hadn't been converted to allow them to go into yeshiva.
Allow the kids.
A kid, a child.
Yeah, I don't know. And again, in an
Wasn't
Orthodox,
even
an
know.
Orthodox yeshiva, that's an entirely different, different thing. But there are all these questions, I mean, I can smile and say, who would have thunk? But there are people who are thinking, they are people who are living it. And, and we need to go back to what Potok would say, what Reines would say, and what Roman would say. We need to go back to what are those foundational principles that, that help us make a decision and say, okay, this is what our people are saying. How do we make that consistent with the Jewish values that we've been promoting? Okay, well, I'm going to stop there. Let me ask a question. Unless somebody has a burning question on stuff that we talked about. Okay, we can go one of two ways next week. In my original, but I never get through as much as I want to get through anyway. In my original outline, next week was going to be looking at some of the stories in the Torah, in the Bible, and we joked about the Purim story, but looking at them with an adult lens, or a different kind of lens, rather than just the way that we may have heard it as a Bible story when we were kids. That was in my original outline. The other thing we can do that. We can put that off for a week and go on with more things about the life cycle with womb to tomb, and get into questions about the whole thing about bar and bat mitzvah, and about marriage, and then about and divorce, and about death and mourning. I mean, we can spend a day on that and push off the stories, if you will. I want to make sure that I keep one day, one of our meetings, just for your questions. I jokingly say it's not stump the rabbi, it's ask the rabbi, and anything that's in your mind about, because we can't cover everything. So anything that's in your mind, and if there are things that you want to send me in advance about questions, and if I need to do the research, I can. So what's you thinking? Should we keep going with the life cycle, or should we switch into more of the Torah stuff and Midrash? Make an extra week. I can't do it on a Thursday, but we'll see. We can be open to continuing. All right, so we'll go on with life cycle stuff next week then, and see where it is. And I thank you. I thank those who are here, those who are on Zoom. Thank you. Feel better, everybody. Thank you for being with us. Thanks to Ruth Ann.